So, this is a really interesting movement, and the core of it was the show that's coming to the Guggenheim is arranged around 1910 to 1930. Although I am going to be a little bit broader than that, because the beginnings of it started with the post-impressionists, with Signac and his interaction with Robert Delone and Matisse, and some real theories about color relationships that started at that point. So that started before the actual Orphism movement, but Orphism emerged in the early 1910s when the innovations brought about by modern life were radically altering conceptions of time and space. Again, this is something which Cézanne was really the precursor of, because his multiple points of view, his condensation, his concentration of observed material from a still life or a landscape, converging multiple points of view at with different timings, was really the beginnings of this business. The artists connected with Orphism engaged with ideas of simultaneity in kaleidoscopic compositions, investigating the transformative possibilities of color, form, and motion. Selected works by artists including Robert Delone, Sonya Delone, Marcelь Düšan, Kupka, Picabia, and the synchronists, Stänton Macdonald-Rайta and Morgana Rassela.
Synchronous.
Well, no, it's not synchronous. It's synchronous.
No? Okay.
Because it's actually as opposed to symphony, it's synchromy. So it's color. And they're playing off of that notion of, thank you for bringing that to attention, because that's really what it is.
Yeah, it is. It's two different words altogether.
Yes.
Right.
But the correlation between them is really important too, and that distinction is important. You know, their crossover between music and color, between abstract forms and musical themes and rhythms, are something that they play with a lot in this. So, okay. I'm going to go here and just give you a preview of some of the things that we're going to be heading into. See, they limited the scope of what this exhibition is from, 1910 to 1930, but actually, somebody like Stänton Macdonald-Rайta and Sonya Delone continued their work up into the 70s with this exploration of color and abstract form. So let's see. And I'm going to give you a little preview of a spread of people who were connected and affected by this movement. There are many more, and I'm going to go into more depth into that as we go along. This was a very short, really the essential beginnings of this were from around 1900 to up to World War I was the most powerful impact of this movement, but it spread out and kept going. It's really a pan-European and American movement. So I'm giving you the spread of images to look at, and we'll go further into these artists as we move along. Okay, so Orphism or Orphic Cubism is a term coined by Apollinaire, the poet, in 1912. It was an offshoot of Cubism focused on pure abstraction and bright color, influenced by Fauve and the theoretical writings of Paul Signac. There were also several other, scientific explorations that were going on, that color theory and ideas about how we take in and see color. If you folks have any questions out there, throw them at me in the chat, and if they're directly relevant to what I'm talking about, they're actually, just as Joan piped in, they're helpful because I have more things rolling around in my head than I can come out with. So the Orphists were rooted in Cubism, but they really launched into color where Cubism was focused more on a kind of monochromatic exploration of form and combining different points of view. So these folks took that and brought color into that. So the Orphists tended towards a more pure kind of lyrical abstraction. They saw art as the unification of sensation and color. So I have talked about synesthesia in other talks that I've done. These folks were very much into the idea of color and sound, the sensory links between color and sound. Hence this Orpheus, the myth of the lute player, so there's a simultaneity of color and form and sound. It's an endless interrelated state of being, of movement. So I'm gonna pull up a quote from Signac at this point. We're looking at a Signac painting, and he was, influenced by the latest science, but also he was working along with Seurat, and became frustrated with the little dots and the amount of time that it would take to complete a painting. So he moved on from what was called pointillism to something that he called divisionism, larger slabs of color, and so he could paint faster. Okay, that eloquence of coloring, that lyrical harmony, these are the great strengths of Delacroix's genius. Thus, there cannot be a color key. All the warm, joyful colors are balanced by their cool and tender complementaries. in such a way as to create a decorative symphony. So there we are. The music starts coming into it. And here is one of the Delacroix. You know, there's this rhythmic movement. They're very turbulent. He was a really wonderful colorist and attached symbolic meaning to color. Not that he was the only one, but and so here is a still life with parrot by Robert Delone, and this is really how he integrated what Signac, which is, oh, I didn't even put his name on it. The painting on the right is by Signac, and the painting on the left is Robert Delone. So you can see how color has become independent of the local object. So, you know, this is a pine tree at Saint-Tropez. Well, it's really kind of using the opposite color from what a green would be. I mean, kind of those reds and warm oranges. So on the color wheel, this would be kind of like the opposite. And again, we have Cézanne. And what I wanted to say about this at this point is, you know, if you look at the Cézanne, there's these multiple points of view that are kind of condensed into the composition. It's observable visual information to create, combined together at different times to create a new kind of structure, a kind of surface design. And you can see, I mean, you know, these big slabs of color that he's using, and the kind of vibrancy of those light spaces, the negative spaces that he's leaving, and working it up from there. Now this may not be a finished painting, quote unquote, but it's got a lot of vitality, and you get the energy level that's there. So this would be something which, you know, in 1906, Cézanne died. There was a big show of Cézanne's work in 1907, and Delone would have been very aware of that and would have seen it. So, and out of Cézanne came Cubism, those multiple points of view, the structural design of the surface, creating depth out of tonal overlaps and tonal changes. And then there's Matisse, where color has become independent. And again, he was somebody who worked with Signac in understanding kind of the color relationships, how color changes when it's up against other colors, and what you can do with that. Okay. And here is, you know, Delone's development of this notion of the cubism and color merging together, where he's using this cubist structure, but he's starting to introduce more vibrant colors and all of that. There's this vitality to these pieces, you know. It's the modernity, the sense of movement, of architecture and nature merging together. And though Delone had virtually discarded representational imagery in the spring of 1912, when he embarked on the window theme, vestiges of the view are still visible in this series. Here, as simultaneous windows, second motif, first part. This is from the Guggenheim. This is in the Guggenheim collection. It's the same moment. The centralized ghost of the Eiffel Tower is still in there. You can see those triangular shapes and all that in this kind of crystalline view. And I pulled up this view of the Eiffel Tower with trees in front of it and all that. So you get the idea of these merging of shapes and forms. And again, simultaneous windows, you again see that triangular shape in there. And I brought up this Braque, and you know, Braque, I didn't pull up a lot of Braque. I wish I had, because his colorism, what he comes up with later on in his career, integrating it with Cubism, fits really in with this Orphism. But you get this business, the structure, the triangular shapes, all of that, and the business of rhythm, of music, of how artists tried to portray that sense of sound into their painting. They were really thinking about this at that time. And again, that Eiffel Tower shape in the center. Simultaneous windows on the city. This is an interesting piece. It's, you know, it's a frame within a frame. There's this whole notion about the window in Western art anyway, that this is a view out into the world, but also a view into the inner world. And he kind of breaks the boundaries here. Okay. So simultaneous contrast, the interaction of color, the colors and tones next to each other, where you've got these large areas of red and yellow against violet and blue and green. These really saturated colors and the kind of interaction that's happening between them. The contextual color is really important in all this, because when you put colors next to each other, they do very different things. In different areas, they look very different. Even if they can be the same color, put into a different field of color, and it totally changes how they act and how they look. Okay. And, you know, again, this business of kind of a kaleidoscopic view. a sense of the movement, and this is both the movement of the color interacting with each other, but also of the composition and that business um, of kind of a vortex happening in these pieces, where they start to deal with this circular motion. Again, something which in Cézanne is in his landscapes and in his still lifes. There's this vortex business going on. So although it's not as obvious in the Cézanne, when you break down the composition into just form, you can begin to see how the planes interact. And this is one of the things that came out of that. Okay. And here is Robert and Sonia Delone. I did not focus a lot on Sonia Delone's work because we just did a talk a few times ago on her, though she's worth spending a lot of time with, not to cast any shadow on her. But the exploration of color and form, you know, the way how the greens interact with the oranges and the yellows, what's happening with those blues in the context of that Robert Delone piece. You know, look at the blue and look at the red dots in the lower part, and look at how that blue dot kind of recedes and the red dot comes forward. Again, same blue next to that red as in the dot, but they really feel different. Same red as the red in the dot in next to the blue. So this is the business that they're playing around with. Okay. And they are not the only ones who were interested in music and its relationship. Now, Paul Klee was very, very influenced by the Delonés. That he had been exploring abstract shapes and colors and his wonderful, you know, kind of fantasy worlds. But when he saw what Robert and Sonia were doing, it really liberated him to go even further. And he was a great musician. So from my understanding, he and his wife would play every morning, and he was a violinist. And actually, early on in his career, he did play in an orchestra. But these wonderful shapes and forms, the kind of the harmonics in Bach was something that he, you know, the sense of tonal shift, of repetition and difference. And one of the things that this all did was really liberate color from local reality. So these folks were really set free in this period. The Cubists really set up this idea that you design multiple points of view, you design the surface, you can do overlaps and do what would be considered real visual spaces by the gradients that happen within the forms, okay? From light to dark, you see these kind of overlaps. And in this Picabia, you can definitely see, you know, how even in this lower right-hand corner where those three gray shapes meet, look at the gradient within those and how those overlaps kind of flip around. So this is kind of what the Cubists brought to this. And then you had the introduction of color, and this wonderful Paul Klee. I mean, just what a dream. But if you look at the squiggles in it, they really have that kind of correlation to musical notes, to a score. Just fabulous fantasy. And again, Kandinsky, I'm going to pull up a quote from Kandinsky too. His crossover between music, I mean, this piece was really part of a kind of apocalyptic premonition of World War I. There was a lot of conflict. So harmony and dissonance are all part of music. It's all part of what gives its substance and structure. So, you know, I was showing this, Joan saw this piece earlier and she said, "Oh, I don't like that painting." Well, that's good.
That's
Because basically what it is it's about dissonance. It's about the fractiousness of what was in the air in Europe at that time. He also was correlating it to sound. And Kandinsky did have this synesthesia business. He saw color and, well, he heard color and saw sound. That's something that those crossovers in the brain happen for certain people. So anyway,
Larry, I just want to say that
sure.
I appreciate all of it. I wasn't a big Cubism fan, but when you had the Picabia, and you were explaining it,
Yes.
I've had a new appreciation of that Cubism with the folding over of that. And that really helps. Of course, this helps you appreciate all the paintings, and that's what the purpose of it, this whole program series is. It was really interesting, and I did like the clay. I did like that a lot. The fish and the musical notes.
Yeah.
That's absolutely exquisite. So, but with your explanation, I'm sorry, Larry, this is not my favorite painting.
Okay. Okay. So from this effort arises its own accord of natural consequence. The comparison of one's own elements, those of other arts. In this case, the richest lessons are to be learned from music, which has for several centuries been the art that uses its resources not to represent natural appearances, but to express the inner life of the artist and to create a unique life of musical tones. An artist who sees that the imitation of natural appearances, no matter how artistic, is not for him. The kind of creative artist who wants to and has to express his own inner world sees with envy how naturally and easily such goals can be attained in music, the least material of the arts today. So that's a quote from The Spiritual in Art from Kandinsky. So we'll move on from old Kandinsky to, this is another movement. And this was Morgan Russell and Stэнton Macdonald-Rite were two American painters who came to Paris. They had seen glimpses in some shows in New York of what was going on in Europe in the avant-garde, and that really, attracted them. So the first thing that they did when they landed in Paris was get to the Stein's salon. So Gertrude and Leo Stein had the salon where the latest in contemporary art, Matisse and Picasso would frequent the salons. They would go there. Leo especially, but also Gertrude, were great collectors, and this wonderful Cézanne 5 apples was in Leo's collection, and basically Morgan Russell illuminates the early formulation of these ideas about color as the basis of form and content. The spheres of color just barely coalescing into the suggestion of fruit against the background of waves of color. When Morgan Russell met with Leo Stein, he encouraged Russell to explore the abstract qualities of color, and he actually lent this little Cézanne of 5 apples to him for a period of time so that he could study it and try to understand the multiple points of view within this very simple, seemingly simple little painting. And I could go into more depth into this, but I'll save this for another talk. But you can see how the use of color and how the forms were beginning to affect how Russell was approaching painting. And they basically dove right into abstraction. And this was a poster from a show that was in 1913, where Morgan Russell and Stanford Macdonald-Rite had a show together, both in Germany and in France. And here you have synchronomy, number 3, where in this Stänton Macdonald-Rite, you still see the objects. You can see the chair kind of abstracted off to the right. You see the painting of the slats of the back of the chair and the seat, and you can see the still life on the table and the bottle off in the distance. But it's really about these color harmonies, the interaction of those colors, those color relationships and tonal relationships. And the Russell is much more abstracted, and you see, where those round forms from the apples have become independent of appleness and become their own form. And here again is another Russell piece. It's relatively small. I mean, it's the all over shape is 16 by 12. So each one of these panels would be 8 by 6 inches. And then he would assemble them and play around with them. I'm sure he had a ball with that in his studio. And again, here's a really luscious small painting, 9.5 by 12 inches. But you know, you can see the buildup of paint. So there's a lot of color decisions that were made along the way in this piece. So Stänton Macdonald-Rite, Oriental Synchromy in blue and green. And it was really Stänton Macdonald-Rite stuck with this thing. Morgan Rassela tried a number of different things, a number of different approaches, stylistic approaches later on, and finally came back to this synchronism. But Wright really stuck to his guns. Beautiful, harmonic kind of shifts going on in this lovely painting. He was very influenced by Asian painting. He actually came later on in life. Well, I'll talk more about that later. I'm going to come to some other images, and I got to keep moving along. Shortly before World War I, Stänton Macdonald-Rite and fellow artist Morgan Rassela coined the term synchromy to distinguish their kaleidoscopic canvases from other earlier manifestations of modernism, meaning just distinguish themselves from Orphism. They wanted to claim that they came up with this independent of the Delonés. I don't know what difference it makes. There was a lot in the air, and they were picking up on it. The meaning, color, the word evokes symphony and thus suggests a relationship to music, the most abstract and, for Macdonald-Rite, ecstatic art form. Macdonald-Rite made some completely abstract works, but in 1916 he began to utilize a style of color-infused figuration, as in this painting. Decades later, he's said that the picture was based on, in its forms and arrangement and subject matter, on an opium smoking group. So you can actually pick up on some figures in figurative elements in this. And, you know, it's kind of this hallucinogenic interaction of forms, beautiful depth and multiple dimension. Okay, music of Gershwin, 1941. You know, we're getting later in the career. Beautiful color. I mean, Stänton Macdonald-Rite is just an exquisite colorist. Didn't have a heck of a lot of success early on in his career. He taught out in California and maintained a studio in California and in Kyoto. So he traveled back and forth to Japan and the United States and taught. Again, Beethoven series, symphonic form, just lovely color. I mean, the guy he had it. I'm just going to stay with these for a minute to let you guys soak them in. Again, this business of the interaction of geometric and circular form, of rhythm, and there's also this business of transparency, where shapes will pass through other shapes and become different colors. different tones of the color. Really interesting work. Again, this is late in his career. Still Life with Red Vase is really, you know, it's 1973. I think he died in 78. I can't remember now. But no, wait, he died in 73. He died in 73 or 74. The other thing that I forgot to mention is these two guys were working on trying to create a light machine that would translate sound into color. And I'm thinking that Macdonald-Wright must have gone nuts with the light shows that were going on in the 60s behind the music. But I digress, and I'm going to move on because I see how time is going. So the influence of Macdonald-Wright and Russell, when they came back to the United States, was very profound. It affected a lot of the abstraction that was going on in the United States. They would all have seen each other through Stieglitz's gallery 291. So these folks would really have known each other. Blumner and Dove would have known about the experiments that were going on with these two. And again, Marston Hartley, musical theme. This was 1912, 1913. He was in Europe at that time, so he was in the middle of this kind of pan-European abstract colorist business that was going on. Great, wonderful, you know, and you even see, you know, the color notes and all that stuff, the musical notes. And to bring it up, Stu Davis loved jazz, and of course he would have known about the experiments that these guys were involved in. Wonderful colorist also, and used to have jazz playing in the studio all the time when he was painting. Stu Davis is an interesting character. He's a kind of a crossover from the early abstraction into kind of pop art, where he would integrate images from everyday life in the city into his abstractions. And then we have Joan Mitchell and her sensory integration, the business of color and form. She had synesthesia, so she would use that as part of her development of her paintings in color. And then this little Helen Frankenthaler. I brought this in because, you know, I see a kind of musical bar in the middle of this whole thing. So this fabulous show is going to be, I'm going to go back here because I forgot to put the last page in. So I'm going to go back to the beginning. Sorry. Okay. Dissonance and Harmony is going to be on at the Guggenheim from November 8th, 2024 to March 9th, 2025. And, you know, I gave you a wide range of things. I don't know what's going to be in this show yet. They didn't publish the playlist, but there hasn't been a show like this since 1978. There was a show at the Whitney of synchronism and synchronism and its influence on American painting. This one is going to be, I think it's going to integrate both those movements, the Orphism and synchronism. Really hard for me to come out with. Anyway, if there's any questions at this point, be more than happy to answer them, but that's it.
Yeah, that's it.
Okay, great.
Wait, somebody raised their hand. Jennifer, could you type it in the chat function so we could read it that way? No, and our director was on it with you. Where will the exhibit be?
Hi, Jennifer. It's going to be at the Guggenheim.
Okay. And by the way, I believe we have museum passes at the library. So if you have, I think we have it to the Guggenheim. If you have a Chappaqua Library card, you could go online and reserve it for 3 days. The rules are very strict, but you pick it up, and that's day 1, the day you pick it up, and you have 2 days, and you must return it on the 3rd day. But we have quite a selection of museum passes. You know what? I'm going to see if I could get you the link. I can't get it. Are you still there? Hello? Yeah. A lot of thank yous, Larry.
Hey.
All right. Okay. Any other questions?
There was a lot more for me to say about this stuff, but there's only so much you can fit into an hour.
Yeah, hold on. There's some chat. Where will the exhibit be? That was it. Yeah, there's always a lot more I know that you have. You just need somebody to ask the questions, and I'm sorry I'm not great at that.
Yeah,
okay, everyone.
You ask good questions.
Have a wonderful weekend, and we'll see you in 2 weeks. Who's going to be in 2 weeks?
I am still working on that one.
Okay. All right. So it's a work in progress, everyone.
Well, I may actually do a talk on a particular Cézanne, and that was one of the things on focused mainly on one painting. I will, basically one of the things that I was talking about today is how influential those Cézanne paintings were on all this stuff in modernism, and I'd like to go a little bit more concretely into that and show what that means. So
yeah, that's a good idea.
Yep.
Okay. Bye, everyone. Speak to you later.